Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Ben, and welcome to part 16 to the Pixel Platformer series. Wow, it's been quite a few videos when I said that it would be like 3 to 5. This series has been made possible by the people who support my channel by purchasing my Godot course and by becoming a member of the channel. In this final video, we're going to create a transition for when we go through our door. And we're also going to make it, I'd like to make it so that in order to go through the door, maybe you have to press up or space, maybe up, in order to go through a door. Something like that. We'll see. Let's start off with a transition. So we're going to create a new scene. Now, we want this transition to be a singleton or an auto load. And the reason we want that is so that while the transition is running, if we switch scenes, it won't stop the transition animation while we're switching scenes. So we're going to start by creating, let's start with an other node. And then just do a basic node, and we'll call this level we'll just call it transition. Transitions, like this. And we'll attach a color rect to it. We're going to do just a very simple transition. We'll make it black. And we'll make this, if we click on it, we can make it take up the whole screen by default. We'll add an animation player. Now, I don't think, have I used animation players? Oh yeah, we did in the moving spike enemy. So you should already be somewhat familiar with them. We'll save and we can put transitions. We can just save transitions out here. That should be fine. Now create a new animation. This will be exit level. And we can have it take, oh, that's fine. 1 second for now. For the exit level, we'll have the black come from the right-hand side of the screen. So I'm going to grab this edge of our color rect and drag it all the way to the edge of the screen here. And then I'm going to key the, let's see, the rect. What do we need to key here? Can we just key the size? I'm trying to understand what we could key here. I think we should key the anchor actually, or the margin. That's what we want to key here. The reason is because if we key the size, I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work. If we key the margin, then no matter if you scale the screen, it should always be this distance from the left-hand side of the screen. So that should work for us. So we'll key the margin, and we'll come to the end, and then we'll drag this all the way over here, and we'll key the left margin again. Now we have, I see, for some reason it's set to discrete by default. So you can see this little icon right here. In Godot, you have continuous and you have discrete. Discrete is generally used for like pixel art or like an animation where you don't want it to transition. It will give you a jumpier animation. You can see that it just jumps immediately from here all the way to here. There's no tweening in between. And that can be useful for certain things. But in this case, we want continuous. And there you can see now it's transitioning. If we play the animation, it goes all the way from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen. And we can choose a cubic interpolation too. So it kind of starts off a little bit faster. Now 1 second does seem too long. Let's do half a second, 0.5. And we'll come here and zoop. That looks good to me. There's a little bit of jittering here over on the left-hand side. but I don't think that will affect anything. Okay, so we have an exit level. Now we're going to do a new animation. We'll have an enter level. And this will be, we'll start off with the color rect all the way on the end, like this. And we'll key let's see. We'll key our left margin. But we also want to key our right margin. And then our right margin is actually going to be the one we're going to animate. And we'll key it all the way this way. Oops. Well, I messed that up. Let's see. So we key our right margin. And we come to the end of the animation and drag it all the way over here and key it there. Okay. So now you should have your margin right should be at 0 when your time is at 0, and then at the end your margin right should be at -320, and your margin left should be at 0. We switch back to our exit level. That seems to work. We switch back to our enter level, and that seems to work. We just need to make sure and turn it to continuous again. And also we'll use cubic again. And there we go. Now we have an enter level, which is set to 1. We'll set it to 0.5 again and drag this all the way over here. And save. So now we've got our transitions. We need to attach a script to this node here that will allow us to play these transitions. We're just going to do, we're going to get access to our animation player. Now in Godot 3.5, in order to get access to a node, you can drag it right into here. Oops, sorry. If you hold Control and then drag it into here, then it automatically does onReady var, animation player for you. Now it does undercase here, and it seems that Godot is switching to snake case for variables like this. So that's something that I may have to adjust in my tutorials, because I'm used to doing it like this. But that's okay. We're going to make a function called exit level transition. No. Play exit transition. Pass. And another function called play enter transition. And for play enter, whoops. That's a website I was looking at that reviewed my Game Maker book, which is out of date, but there's some people who still use it. And so I thought it was interesting that somebody reviewed it. Let's see. So now we want to have our animation player right here. We'll have it play our exit level. Oh, this is enter level, so play enter level. And this one will play animation player dot play exit level. There we go. Now we can make this transitions a singleton. So come into project settings, and come into path. We'll make sure that you're on auto load. Then select this little path icon, and we'll select our transitions. Make sure you get the scene and not the script, because we are doing an auto load scene again. Then add. Now we have transitions as an auto load. Now if we go to our level 1 and we come into our player, open up our player scene, and then we come into our player's script here, and we find, oh, actually it's in the door, I think. So we're going to come into world and door.gd, and here we go. We can play the transition. Transitions dot exit, or play exit transition. Okay, now let's see how this looks. Run our game, come to the door, and that doesn't work, right? Definitely got some issues here. Okay, so silly me, I made this just a base node, but we want this to follow the camera. And in order to get this UI to follow the camera around, we need to change the type of this to a canvas layer. So all you have to do is right click on your transitions, do change type, scroll down, select canvas layer. Now our script, however, needs to inherit, it extends nodes still, so we need to click on the script and make sure that we make it extend canvas layer. There we go. Now when we run our game, the transition should work better. Boop. We see our transition, although we do see that jittering over here on the right, so we're gonna have to solve that problem. I didn't know if we would see it or not. I was working under the impression that we wouldn't, but I was wrong. Okay, so that worked. However, it plays, what happens is when our player goes through, if we open up our door scene, come into our door script here, our player, we play the transition and then we go to the next scene, but it immediately goes to the next scene. And we want to be able to wait until this transition is finished before we go to the next scene, right? Well, in Godot, there is a function called yield. And what this does is it, yield will exit out of this function at this point until some signal has been emitted, and then once that signal has been emitted, it will come back into this function and continue where it left off. So using yield, we can make it exit out of the function right as we play the exit transition, and then come back into the function once the exit transition is finished and go to the next scene. So we're going to use yield transitions.play exit transition. So you can pass in a function as the first argument for yield, and then if you pass in a function, you want to the signal that you're going to wait for is the completed signal, because all functions in Godot have a completed signal that the function state will emit when it's finished. So that's a little complicated, but just know that this will make Godot exit out of this function until this play exit transition function is finished, and then it will come back in and change to the new scene. So let's see how that looks. So we go through our door, and we got an error message. Yield not of type object. Yes, I forget. So the problem is that our yield function here doesn't actually return a function state. And so if we come into our transitions, there's some different ways that we can do this. And I'm not sure what is going to be the easiest way to do it. We've set up our play exit transition function, but this function would also need to have a yield function inside of it in order for this line of code to work. Because technically this function finishes right away. The animation doesn't finish right away, but the function does. So what we can do is we can actually make our own signal, and we'll call this transition completed. Okay? And then we can have our animation player right here. We can come into its signals and we can say when an animation is finished, we'll click on that signal, we'll connect it to transitions. Then we can emit signal transition completed. Okay? So what we're doing here is we've made our own signal on our transitions object. And when the animation is finished, then we emit that signal out and say, hey, the transition is done. I think this is the best way to handle this situation. Now, if we come back into our door, instead of yielding in this way, what we can do is we can say transitions.play exit transition. So we'll just play the function, but we'll yield on transitions, the object transitions, transition completed, like this. So we'll play the function to play the exit transition, and then we'll wait until that transition is completed, and then we'll change to the new scene. So let's see if this works. I think this is going to be a good way to do this. Let me come into here, and there we go. Now we've transitioned to the new room, but we can't see it because in the new room we're not starting the new transition back. Now, there's a kind of a cheat to do this, which is that we just start the enter transition right before entering the new scene. So we can say transitions dot play enter transition like this. Now, we don't have to yield on this one, although you could, but I think that it makes sense not to yield on this one. So then we transition, and now we're on the next level. So we still need to fix that ugly little jitter that we have over on the side, but really pretty impressive little transition right into the next room. Now we can, our game isn't paused, so if we go through the door and then run back, our character is like running away from the door. So we want to pause the game, and we can do that right here. We can just say get tree dot paused equals true, and this will pause our game right when we play the exit transition. And then when we come back and play the enter transition, we'll get tree dot paused equals false. Okay, so we play the exit transition and pause the tree. Once that transition is completed, we play the enter transition, unpause, and change to the new level. Now there's going to be a problem here. Oop, our game is paused. That's great, but nothing else is working, right? It just paused. So what we need to do is we need our transitions to run while the game is paused. So if we come into transitions here and come up to inspector, and then we go into pause mode, we want to set it to process. That way this code will run and this animation player and everything in here will run even when the game is paused. Now you'll notice that the animation player's pause mode is set to inherit, which means it's inheriting its pause mode from the transitions, which is set to process. Okay, so let's see how this works. Let's try it. Come back, hit the door, the game is paused, we get our transition, and then we're in the new level, and everything works great. Now let's fix our silly little transition. So it's the exit tree animation that is weird, right? It's all jittery over on the right side. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, but the solution to that is just to click on it, drag our margin farther this way on the right side, and then key that, create a key. And then I'm going to just drag that key to the start here. And I'm going to come to the end. And I'm going to make sure this is selected. And then right click over here and do duplicate keys. So now it might jitter some. Is it going to jitter some? It doesn't jitter some. So maybe we could just set that value to 0 actually. I'm going to click on both of those margin rights and set them to 0 and see if that solves our jitter problem in game. No, it doesn't. Okay, so my first intuition was right. We'll just set the value to 10 or something. And what that should do is just make it so that it's a little bit outside of the view, and then we won't have the jitter issue. You could also maybe scale a black sprite. Looks pretty good. That's a pretty cool transition for, you know, hardly any work. Now this same code that we have here for handling the transition and for playing the transition will work for any transition animation you make. So you can create whatever animation you want. This was just the one that I wanted to do. Come in from the left and then exit from the right. It seemed like a sensible transition. You can make it any color too if you don't want it to be black. But it really adds a lot of polish to moving between the levels. I really think it helps a lot. Okay, so the very last thing we want to do, right? Try and make it so that we don't just instantly go to the next level when we touch the door. So let's have a variable inside. I think this is how I want to do this. Let's have a variable inside of our door, var, that is called overPlayer, I guess. We'll set it to false. Now when the door enters a body, if that body is a player, and if that body is a player, we'll just say overPlayer equals true. And we'll come into our door, and then we'll come into our signals and do body exited, attach a new signal, and we'll say if not body is player, return. So that's our exit case. Otherwise, overPlayer equals false. Okay. Now let's make a new function up here called go to next room. And we'll just copy all of our transition code here. I think we'll do from the transitions play exit transition to the very end. We do Control X, then paste it up here, Control V. Okay. And we're going to leave this line here for now. We're going to need that in just a second. Okay. Then we'll just say function underscore process if input dot is action just pressed UI jump UI up then we'll copy this line if target level path dot empty return, so there's no door to go to. That's our exit case. Otherwise, we can say, oh, we need another exit case though. Actually, this exit case can be right at the start of our process, which is if not overPlayer return. Because we don't want to be able to exit the room if the player's not over the door. Let's see, what else do we have here that we can do? This is pretty good. And then we can say, go to next room, like this. So now we're keeping track of whether or not the player is over us. If they are, then we check to see if the up key is pressed, just pressed. And if it is, then we go to the next room. So let's try this, see how this goes. We'll come over here, we can go over to our door, but we don't actually go through the door until we press the up key. Okay, now there was an issue, which was that our player jumped when we pressed the up key. And we might have to figure out how to solve that problem together. So the other issue that I want to show, though, is that technically, if we press the up key, even when we're not on the ground, it will still go to the next room. And I would rather have it to where the player has to be on the ground. So instead of just saying overPlayer equals true, we'll make a new variable and we'll call it player. And so inside of our door body entered, instead of setting overPlayer equal to true, we'll set player equal to body. And then down here, instead of setting it to false, we'll set player equal to null, like this. Okay? And then up here, we have if not overPlayer return, but instead we can say if not player, because if player is null, then we don't want to try and do this next part, okay? So then we can create another exit case in here, which is if not player dot is on floor, like this. Return. So now we can also return if the player's not on the floor. If we come back and then we try and do it, we try and go through the door in the air, we can't. We can now only go through the door when we're on the ground, except that that actually doesn't work. And I'm guessing the reason it doesn't work is because the player is jumping. So let's set our go through door button to be UI accept for now, which is the space key, just to make sure that our code is working properly. Okay, so if we're in the air and we press space, we won't go through the door. But if we're on the ground and we press space, we do go through the door, and that works properly. So our code is working. The last problem is that our player is immediately jumping because we're trying to use both the up key for jumping and the up key for going through a door. Now this is a bit of a problem. And the reason is because it's a little bit difficult to tell Godot which one we would prefer, because the logic for going to the next room is inside of our door. And the logic for pressing that key is also inside of the door. So the logic for both of the key presses are in separate nodes. Now we can move the logic from our door into the player script. And that's one solution, and that's not a bad solution. We are getting a lot of logic inside the player script, so it would be better if we could have the logic inside of the door. Now, another thing we might consider doing is capturing the input, because Godot allows you to say that input has been handled already, so don't propagate this input. But that's usually useful for control nodes, and I don't think it applies in our current situation because we're using, because of how we're getting the input right here, like this. I don't think it would work. I mean, what you would do is you would say get tree.set input as handled. So this could set the input as handled, but I don't think this will work in our situation. I got to make sure to change this back to up like this. I don't think this will work in our situation. I think we'll still jump. Yep. So, and explaining exactly why that doesn't work in this situation is a little complicated. But essentially, the player is getting the input first, is my guess. So if we were to come to the level and see that our player is higher up in the scene tree than our door, and I don't think we can insert the door earlier. I guess we can. We can put the door before. So this will test our theory to see if the player input was happening first. So now we'll probably jump and still go through the door. Nope, we don't. So it still doesn't work, even moving our door up like that in the scene tree, which is interesting. I learned something new with that information. So what does seem like the best way to handle this? Well, I think the way that we can handle this is to move the code for going to the next room and for processing this input into the player. So we'll be moving this code into the player. So let's do that. We'll come into our player. First, we can just copy the go to next room. Well, we have to have access to the target level path that we want to go to. So it's not quite that simple. I mean, the simple solution here is just to use a different key, right? But I would rather use the up key. So can we disable the player's jump right here before we actually go to the next room? You know, maybe the solution here is to actually, before we call go to next room, like this, if we pause the game, I don't think that would work because we are pausing the game right away. So, you know, this is a difficult problem to solve because of how we've set up our code. Well, the other solution is actually to disable jumping on the player, now that I think about it. So let's do that. So we'll come into our player, we'll create a new variable called canJump, and we'll set it equal to true. Now when our player tries to jump, we have our canJump we have a function called canJump, so I don't want to name it that. I don't want to have the same name. We'll have a variable called onDoor, and we'll set it to false. Now when we come into our jump code, our canJump right here, and then we have an input jump right here, we want to actually exit this function if we're on a door. So if on door, return. So we just won't be able to jump when we're on a door because we will be capturing the input to go through the door. Now, if you want to be able to jump while your player is over the door, then you're probably going to want to use a different key, and that is the simplest solution. If you look at games like Spelunky, the input for going through a door is different from the input for jumping, and that is a solution. But I want to have it be the same in this case, so we're going to use this onDoor variable to make sure that we're not on a door in order to jump. Now inside of our door, we can just say player dot, or we can say, before we set this, we can say body.onDoor equals true. And right here, after this line, but before our other one, so in between the two, body.onDoor equals false. Now this should just disable jumping on our player when we're on a door. And you can see we do then transition through that door. But if we're over here, we can't go through this door, but we also can't jump. So that's something to keep in mind. And again, you might not want to just completely capture that input. We should be able to double jump, which we still can. But if you were right here, an enemy was walking at you and you wanted to jump over it, you would just go through the door instead. But that's kind of the consequence of using the same key for both actions. But you know, that's going to be it for this video. We are 33 minutes into it. I'm pretty happy with how this video turned out. We've got a nice clean transition between our rooms, and that really just feels so much better. It's amazing how much a simple transition can do for the game. So thank you all so much for watching this series. I've really enjoyed it. I think this cleans it up rather nicely overall. We covered a lot of different things. I want to go into some different genres now. If you want to learn more about some platformer type stuff, my 1-Bit Godot course actually covers some other topics in platformers like wall sliding, wall jumping, stuff like that. But I want to explore new genres on the YouTube channel, so I'm going to be coming up with a new series here soon. Keep an eye out for that. Thank you all so much for watching this series. I really appreciate it. If you've made it this far, then you're probably in a small percentage of people who started this series, because that's just how these series are. Not everybody finishes them. So congratulations for completing it, and I will see you all later.